Hey YouTube, welcome back to Dwayne's World. So do you want to control the growth of your lawn, but at the same time, you want to give your lawn a pop on a budget? Well, this video is for you. Better stay tuned. Alright guys, welcome back to Season 4, Episode 22, here on Dwayne's World. 22. Can't believe we're already 22 episodes into the season and we're only about halfway through. But that's okay because I absolutely enjoy putting these videos together for you guys, and I hope you guys are getting something out of every video that I'm putting together for you. Well, in this video, I got to tell you, I am a huge fan of Plant Growth Regulator, and I cannot believe the number of growing seasons that went by where I never used it, and I didn't necessarily know that what I was missing. All right, guys, so before I do any type of treatment to my lawn using PGR, what I want to do now is I'm going to do a Scarify, a mow, and lay down some stripe action. That's right, so let's get to it. All right, guys, so let's kind of take a look at the results here on how well the California Trimmer Catalyst did in kind of dethatching some of these areas that I have in my lawn where I have that outbreak of spurge. Now, I still do have quite a bit of spurge. I'm still battling it. It's not all gone yet, but it is much, much better than it where it once was. However, I want to kind of show you guys again how well the California Trimmer Scarify Cartridge does when it helps lifting this spurge out. So, as you guys can see here, the spurge definitely is much higher. So now when I put my real cartridge back in, it's definitely going to help be able to cut out a lot of that spurge. Again, may not kill it all, but it's definitely going to help the appearance of my lawn. Now I do also have, as you guys can see here, there's a little bit of a dry patch. I'm not exactly sure what happened here. Now my sprinklers, I did double check. Everything seems to be working fine. I may have had some disease or something like that, but as you guys can see here, the lawn is recovering. But what I want to do is I want to remove a lot of that dead debris out of the lawn. A couple other areas, as you guys can see, along right there and even right there. By removing that dead thatch, it's going to allow the lawn to be able to recover quicker. So even though, again, I think my initial plan was to just go ahead and Scarify on this side here, but because I already have the Scarifying cartridge in the unit, but I might as well go ahead and dethatch the entire lawn, and then we'll see what it looks like thereafter. All right, guys, as you guys can see here, the area actually even looks a little bit better than it did, just because the catalyst did remove out a lot more of that debris. So again, it's going to help a lot more water get down into the soil, let the air get down to the soil. It's really going to help this area recover much quicker. So with that, let me go ahead and finish up the rest of the Scarify. Whew, we haven't even got to the point of the video. Oh my goodness, but let's go ahead and take a look here and see how well the California Trimmer Catalyst with the Scarifying cartridge did. Oh man, that color, that's looking phenomenal. Let me turn it around. All right guys, so no mow. This is all Scarify. But as you guys can see, the area that I had that yellowing definitely already starts to look better just because of the fact that I removed that dead thatch. The area over here with all the spurge will definitely look better after our mow. But now the question is, what height of cut? You know, I do not want to go back down to 5/8, even though I was scarifying at 5/8. I probably want to keep it a little higher, you know, maybe a hair under 3/4. So I'm kind of thinking maybe like a 0.7 height of cut, you know, versus 3/4. So with that, I'm going to swap out the cartridges, throw in the 7-blade, and lay down some more stripes. All right, guys, so as you guys can see, we have our 7-blade cartridge installed, and my height of cut is a little less than 3/4 inch. All right, guys, so as you guys can see here, got quite a bit of thatch that came out of the lawn, pretty much a full trash can's worth. All right, so now my plan is to actually mow in this direction here. When I had scarified, I was pretty much scarifying in that direction there. So with that, let's get on with our mow. All right, guys, so a little bit of a change of plans. As you guys can see, I did one little quick pass here before I got it on video. And again, it's in between 5/8 and 3/4. And not that I'm completely scalping. I do not like this height of cut. I'm gonna raise it just slightly. You know, again, this one pass here is not gonna necessarily be a big deal, you know, but when I do the rest of my lawn here, I think I wanna cut it at a slightly higher height of cut than I showed you guys. So what I went ahead and did is I went ahead and raised the height of cut here, and now it's at 3/4 inch. So we'll go ahead and see what that looks like, because I think that's definitely the sweet spot. All right, guys, so I think I like that a little bit better. I think that's much more where I want my height of cut to be. Did miss a little small pass there, so I'll have to go back over that again. Definitely liking the height of cut here versus here. This was just a little bit too short. I think that's gonna work out much better. So with that, let's get on to our mow. All right, guys, so before I show you the lawn, let me show you something that tends to be a pretty common question whenever it comes to real mowing, Bermuda turf, and or when somebody believes there's something wrong with their real mower. If you look at my lawn right here, you can see that there's some unevenness, like that particular pass is higher than that particular pass. And bottom line is, it is. However, what I'll tell you though, people believe that generally this is because of your actual real mower. And it's not, and let me explain why. All right, so for those of you that are newer to Bermuda, or in a lot of cases newer to real mowing, this is a common problem we tend to see with Bermuda turf. Generally, a lot of people think there's something wrong with their real mower because as they're going through that pass, they're noticing that it's cutting lower, and it may appear even to be cutting lower on one side than the other. And I'm not saying there never can be a time that there is an issue with the real mower. However, you have to think about it. What is more likely uneven, your real mower or your grass? And in most cases, it's the Bermuda turf. Now, one of the things that does happen, and right now we're getting towards the end of July, and this is the time that I tend to get the question most often, is, Dwayne, what is causing these lines in my lawn? What it is where the Bermuda has gotten to a place where it's so thick, your real mower is actually floating on top of the grass. Now, what can you do about this? Well, there's a couple ways to take care of it. Number one, you're gonna have to scalp down your lawn, because I bet you money in the months of April, May, June, you may not even had this issue. And it's only till now or in the later part of the season that you started to see it. So the likelihood that your reel mower went bad in the last couple months is probably pretty unlikely. And what's happened is your Bermuda turf has gotten really thick. So there's a couple things you can do to help this. One option is you can do a double cut, and you'll basically be mowing in the opposite direction, and that will help take care of some of that unevenness. However, there's other options you can look at, such as leveling, because maybe in that particular part of your lawn is more unlevel than in other parts of your lawn. You could also do a scalp, and what a scalp will do is really help thin out that turf. Now, the scalp isn't probably the number one thing that people want to do this time of year, just because of how much work it's actually involved. Well, the last option, which is the option I'm going to go with, is to break out my verticutter. And by using the verticutter is basically going to be cutting on the vertical, which will help thin out the turf, help alleviate that problem. So that way, when I start using the reel mower again, the turf isn't going to be as thick, therefore not as much floating, and it'll help alleviate some of those problems. But I don't want to lead anybody on and make them believe that doing any one of those things is going to cure your problem from this point out. It's just the nature of Bermuda. It is the way things are, but those suggestions I offer to you guys will help minimize some of those things. So that way you get the best appearance with your Bermuda turf. All right, guys, so the weatherman said today and yesterday we were in for a cool down. Yes, that's right, and I can definitely feel it. We went from 102 to 99. You know, hats off to the weathermen out there. Gotta tell you, for probably about 3 months straight, you have to somehow make hot weather seem exciting. So they are very creative at what they do. But you know what is exciting? That right there. Let me go ahead and turn it around. We'll see what it looks like. All right, guys, so there we have it. You know, stripe action looking on point. Although, I have a little bit of waviness. Not 100% perfect, but definitely looking on point. The color. I will say that the color did look slightly better prior to the mow and after I did the Scarify. You know, it's one of those things. You know, height of cut versus color versus how tight the lawn looks. You know, generally, turf looks better at a higher height because the color is better towards the top of the leaf. You know, Bermuda turf, as we all know, has that brown stock below it, and then you have a portion of it that's green, which is the part you want to be most visible. But as it continues to grow up, the proportion between the brown stock and the green changes. And the longer it gets, the more brown you have at the bottom and the less green you have on top. Which is why when you're not mowing frequently, you tend to scalp a lot faster. And when the grass is growing like crazy, like it is this time of year because of the heat, it doesn't take long before that Bermuda turf starts to scalp. And this is what kind of leads me into the main part of this video, which is PGR and plant growth regulator and why we want to use it. So with that, let me go ahead and mix up my tank sprayer, show you guys what we'll be throwing down. We'll come back and talk about PGR so you guys get a little bit better understanding of how it works and how to apply it. All right, guys, so now let's kind of go through what we'll be adding to the backpack sprayer as part of the PGR cocktail I'll be throwing down on my lawn. Now, first and foremost, this is the product I'll be using as our plant growth regulator. It is made by a company called Promaxis, and Promaxis uses the same active ingredient as Primo Max. This particular product I did start using about 2 years ago, and it has had the exact same result I've seen with Primo Max, just at a discounted price. The reason why you're seeing two separate sizes here is because about 2 years ago, I picked up this bottle here, which has 8 ounces, which generally would cover about 16,000 square feet. However, I decided to up it this year and purchase the 1 gallon. And the main reason why I did so was because of the fact that for this 8 ounces, the gallon size was only a little bit more than twice the price of that particular 8 ounces. Now, as we all know, 1 gallon has 128 ounces. However, the smaller bottle, which sells for about half the price of the full gallon, is only 8 ounces. So it just made a lot more sense based on the size of my lawn to go ahead and purchase the 1 gallon. Now, I am so glad I kept and saved my smaller bottle here, because whenever you're dealing with PGR, and we'll talk about rates, is that you're not going to need very much of this product, meaning it's going to be quite a while before I get through this 1 gallon, as because most of the time I'll probably only use between 8 and 12 ounces each growing season. That is going to last me quite a bit of time. With this smaller bottle, and why I was so glad I saved it, it basically allows me to refill it. So that way I don't have to keep pouring from the 1 gallon jug. This is going to make it a lot easier. As with the 8-ounce bottle, as you guys can see here, there's a measuring gauge, which is going to make it that much easier for me to be able to mix up the tank spray. Now, what I'll also be using in addition to the PGR is I always like to include any type of humic acid. This is definitely going to help the soil. Now, this generally would be watered in. However, it's going to be going on as a foliar application. During my next lawn watering, this will absorb deeper into the soil. Now, the one thing that I have never done, which I'll talk about now, is the use of Blue Def. All right, guys, so I know I'm not the first YouTuber to put together a DEF fuel video using it as a fertilizer. Now, when you think about DEF fuel, obviously the point of it has nothing to do with lawn care. However, what it actually is in the actual composition of it is the same thing as a fertilizer, because it is pretty much straight urea. Now, urea is probably one of the most common types of nitrogen that you'll find in a variety of different fertilizers, regardless of manufacturer. However, when looking at using DEF fuel, as I'm going to use in this particular video, I would not say that it should be your primary fertilizer. And in fact, in most cases, I would probably even say that a liquid fertilizer should not do most of the heavy lifting. The type of fertilizer you really should be using to really be able to give your lawn the pop and look you want is a granular. However, liquid fertilizers act as a nice supplement versus using it as the fertilizer that carries most of the weight in my overall program. Now, when you look at the formulation of a lot of different fertilizers that are on the market, you're going to find a wide range of fertilizers that are going to give you a different amount of nitrogen, a different amount of phosphorus, and a different amount of potassium. However, when you're dealing with DEF fuel, really the formulation is very basic. It's pure nitrogen. It's going to equate to a 15-0-0, meaning 15% of that particular product is going to be nitrogen. And there's no phosphorus and there's no potassium. So if you're looking for that type of formulation, DEF fuel may not be the product you want to necessarily look at, and you may want to look at a different liquid fertilizer to be able to give your lawn what it truly needs. Now, the rate I'll be going with the Blue Def is 10 ounces per every 1,000 square feet, would be considered a low rate for a liquid fertilizer. You can up that, but based on the 10 ounces per 1,000, you are going to be getting about a tenth of nitrogen whenever you're applying this particular product. All right, guys, so I started off with 2 gallons of water. Now, I always like to start with half the water of the backpack sprayer, which will be 2 gallons. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in everything that I'm going to add in, kind of mix it up with 2 gallons, fill it up to 4, mix it again, and then I'll have a really, really good mix. In addition to the water, I've already added in 4 ounces of the Simple Lawn Solution Soil Treatment Humic Acid Solution. Again, it's 1 ounce per 1,000, which is the recommended rate. So again, and I've also added in the Blue Def, which was, again, 10 ounces per 1,000 square feet. So I went ahead and put in 40 ounces of it. The nice thing about the Def solution, it actually does include a little nozzle here, makes it that much easier to be able to pour into whatever you're measuring. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and add in our PGR. Now, the rate on the PGR is very, very concentrated, meaning you only need 0.25 ounces per gallon, which will cover 1,000 square feet. So in this 4-gallon backpack sprayer, all I'm going to need is 1 ounce. Particular bottle, there is markings for 0.25 ounces, 0.5 ounces. I'm basically going to empty that along with 1 more of those to be able to get to my 1 ounce. All right, so there's a 1/2 ounce. I'll fill it up 1 more time to a 1/2 ounce there. And go ahead and pour that out. Again, that's 1 ounce that went into this 4-gallon jug. All right, so now what I like to do is I like to go ahead and use a little paint mixer here. And go ahead and just attach it to my drill. And then I'll give this a mix. Anytime I do a video as it relates to any type of spraying of a particular product, I always like to review the spray tips and which ones are appropriate for that particular application. Now, for today's application, where we'll be applying the plant growth regulator, it is what we refer to as a foliar application. And this would also hold true for any type of fertilizer you put down where you're allowing that particular solution to absorb into the actual foliar. Now, what's important about that type of application is you do want to use something that has a very fine mist, such as what you get from this TeeJet nozzle, which is actually made for foliar applications. And I'll go ahead and link this one down in the description below. Now, as you guys can see here, we have a couple of different type of nozzles as well, and there are going to be a place in time where you would use one of these particular nozzles. Now, again, as I mentioned, foliar application, really a fine mist is what you're looking for. But a lot of times when it comes to a soil type application, such as maybe a fungicide or a pre-emergent, you'd want to use what they refer to as a FloodJet tip. And what the FloodJet tip basically does is it does also spray in a fan-like pattern. However, the droplet size is going to be much bigger when you're putting down this particular application. So again, anytime you need to get something into the soil, this is the tip you're going to use. Generally, these two tips are going to be the ones that will cover the majority, if not all of the application types as it relates to a liquid application. However, there's one other tip here I like to show you guys, which they refer to as an air induction tip. And the best way of thinking about an air induction tip is it's kind of a cross or a mix between these two here. So when would this be most appropriate? Well, maybe I'm choosing to put down a foliar application or a FloodJet tip application. However, it's really windy outside and I need to get my application down. That's where this particular nozzle is going to come in place, as where it's kind of a hybrid between the two, where you're able to get somewhat of a fine mist. However, you're also getting a heavier droplet. That's where I would use this particular one. Again, a little more optional, as where these two are going to be the ones you absolutely need in your arsenal as it relates to any type of application you're doing in a liquid form. All right, so with that, let's get out to the lawn and throw down that plant growth regulator. Now, when it comes to a plant growth regulator, there are a couple different options you can go with. The majority of them, though, are liquid application. However, you can find a plant growth regulator in the form of a granular, and Anderson's does carry one. However, when you look at the cost compared to a liquid, in my opinion, you're better off going with the liquid and spraying it out. However, if that's not really an option for you, then the granular is absolutely something you want to look at. So a lot of people are curious exactly how plant growth regulator actually works and what it does to the plant. Well, with grass and plants in general, there's a hormone that's released that basically tells it to grow. And the way a plant growth regulator actually works is it blocks that or mimics that it's actually already there to prevent it from producing more, therefore minimizing the actual growth, which is why you're able to keep your lawn under control. And as you can imagine, during the summer months where Bermuda is actively growing, it is producing a lot of that hormone. And that's ultimately why you get that huge surge of growth that comes along with hotter temperatures. So the PGR is, again, going to help that keep it under control so you can maintain your height of cut. So that was probably one of the main reasons why I originally looked into PGR, because I was tired of scalping my lawn, and I definitely did not want to be mowing my lawn 4 or 5 times a week. So that's where PGR definitely helps me out. So even though initially I saw a dramatic improvement with how often I'd have to mow, I also had seen a dramatic improvement in the overall appearance to my lawn, because of the fact that the energy that would normally be used to have that grass grow upwards definitely was distributed differently. So the plant wasn't needing to burn off a lot of its energy growing. It definitely helped the overall appearance of the lawn, and I was very, very ecstatic. Now, there is a lot of different information that's out there when it comes to how often you should be applying plant growth regulator, and bottom line, it really does depend on your climate and what they refer to as growing degree days, meaning the warmer that it is, the more often you'll have to actually apply. Now, in my experience, though, I find that if I'm using PGR at the full rate, I find I get about 3 weeks of regulation between each of those applications. If the temperatures drop, I may get a little bit more. If the temperatures go up, I might get a little bit less. However, I cannot say necessarily specifically when it comes to plant growth regulator that you only need to apply it every 3 weeks or every 4 weeks, because there is that variable when it comes to temperature depending on where you live. However, what's really important is once your lawn is under regulation, you want to make sure you keep it that way. So plant growth regulator, I would not recommend if you're only planning on doing like one treatment during the growing season. You would want to maintain this throughout the growing season up to the point in which your lawn is not going to really be growing any longer, which at that point you'll go ahead and turn it off. However, if you chose to put down plant growth regulator and then let it go, be prepared to get a surge of growth when that lawn comes out of regulation. So again, do not plan on putting down plant growth regulator unless you plan on maintaining it. All right, guys, so there we have it. All done. Now, one of the things I'll tell you, last time I applied PGR on my lawn, I may have over-applied because I think my walking pace was just a little bit too slow. And today, I think it was just a little bit too fast. I probably only needed about 6 gallons. Now, my lawn is 6,900 square feet, so I will be pretty close. Now, the one thing I did do differently, let me show you guys. I sometimes get the question, Dwayne, if you have bare areas like you do here, what do you do? Do you spray? Do you not spray? And in those particular areas, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I don't think it makes a huge difference. But one of the things I did notice is when I do throw down fertilizer in some of those thinner areas, it more easily burns the grass. So for today, I went ahead and stayed away from those areas to prevent any of that burning. And because of the fact that those areas are fairly bare, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put PGR on those areas. Now, in areas like this, or over there where I have a little bit of a dry spot as well, I still do apply PGR in these areas, but you can skip them if you want. That's going to help the lawn recover a little bit quicker, in my opinion, if you do skip the area. But at the same time, just for consistency, I went over that area with the solution just like I would any other part of the lawn that is green. But overall, gotta say, definitely happy with the way the lawn is looking. I think with that DEF fuel, we'll see how it works. In theory, it should, because it purely is just urea at a 1500 formulation. So, you know, it's something I'll probably use from time to time. I'm not going to say it's going to be my go-to fertilizer by any means, but I figured it'd make for a pretty good episode here on Dwayne's World. Kind of throw it out there as an option for you guys, because the one thing I absolutely love is the price comparison compared to some of the other fertilizers that are on the market. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, though, whenever you're using the DEF fuel, even though it is a fertilizer, it's not going to have any of the other nutrients that you may find in a lot of the higher end fertilizers on the market. You know, I think that's pretty much going to do it for this episode here on Dwayne's World. I do have some things lined up for the California Trimmer Catalyst on one of my future videos where I believe I'll be able to improve the stripe action. You want to find out what that is? Well, you better subscribe to my channel, give me a like on this video, and remember, if you want to control the grass and the growth in your lawn, be excellent, party on.